with St. Louis City, having a professional team and a professional club, we're able to get off the sideline and participate in the development of the game at the professional level.
Good morning and welcome to a new edition of the City Voice podcast. I'm joined by an incredibly special guest again, but this time it's Dale Schilly. Dale, brilliant to have you on the show. You are a name that people keep on telling me I have to get on. Everybody's very excited about this one, so hopefully we're going to have a good afternoon. How are you doing?
I think it'll be great, and I'm doing awesome.
Brilliant. Okay, we're going to start with some warm-up questions. These are very serious questions, and I have to get 100% honest answers. World Cup winner.
World Cup winner, Didier Deschamps, France.
Who's your favorite player in the French team?
Any number of them. Any number. Mbappe, how do you go against him?
You can't. You can't. You definitely can't.
Yeah.
Player you most want to see crush this World Cup?
I think we have to go local. Tim Ream and Josh Sargent. I'd love to see the two of them really have one for Tim Ream, a send-off, and for Josh, a splash in the World Cup.
He's been scoring some goals of late.
He has been scoring some goals. That's why he got named to the team. But I like to support our local guys and like to see the two of them be really successful.
As an Englishman, as long as it's not against us, that's fine. I'm in the wrong place for a Josh Sargent hat trick, that's for sure.
I think that's Friday the 25th, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, big day.
Big day for
Not
me.
that I was looking
big day.
at it.
I'm on a plane out of here if it goes the wrong way. Favorite player of all time?
That's easy. Marco van Basten. I've always been a Marco van Basten fan. I loved him when he was with Ajax, loved him when he was with the Dutch national team. Never made a splash in the World Cup, but some of his performances in the European Championships were amazing, and just love the way he thinks about the game, the way he plays, even though he wasn't the most athletically gifted, but he always had an idea, and he was a tremendous finisher.
That famous ball over the shoulder.
Unbelievable
top
against
corner.
Russia.
Ugh, outrageous. Okay, this is a really difficult one. Are you a dog or a cat person?
Dog.
Dog. Oh my God, the cat people are losing out time and time again.
But I don't own one.
You don't own one?
Don't own one.
Okay, Purina might have something to say about that.
I know.
Favorite film?
To Sir with Love. Sidney Poitier.
Favorite St. Louis restaurant?
I think Ragazzi's.
Yeah?
Yeah, I like Ragazzi's. On the hill, it's traditional, it's family. I like Ragazzi's.
Brilliant. Secret skill no one knows about?
Secret skill that a lot of people know about is that I love to cook. And that is my therapy. So when I'm stressed with the game or with coaching or the job, I break out my green egg and I start smoking something. So it's usually a pulled pork or ribs or a brisket, but I love to smoke meat.
That's nice for your family that's your escapism.
Well, when I was coaching in the USL, we might lose a game, and I know that I might get a phone call the next morning from ownership. So I would stop at Schnucks on the way home, buy a couple of pork butts, and smoke meat all night. And my kids didn't know whether they should root for us to win or lose. If we won, they might go hungry. If we lose, they got good food.
So if you weren't in the position that you're in at the moment, if you weren't working in soccer, what would you be?
Oh, if I wasn't in soccer, what would I be? Goodness. I would have to say probably a teacher. Probably be in the classroom and similar environment and just working with kids.
Okay, cool. Well, that's the quick fire question round. Some great answers there. We're going to move on to the focus, which is you today, Academy Director. A big job. When it was announced, fans went wild for it. All over St. Louis, you've got an iconic name in the St. Louis soccer scene. Tell us a little bit about your relationship with St. Louis on that front. Why are people so happy to see you here?
Yeah, I mean, I think just years of being in the business and persevering through all the time and working with kids of all ages and levels, top tier, lower tier, middle tier players, and just spending the better part of 30 or 40 years working locally with players. It helps you get to know people, and all of a sudden they start supporting you, or maybe they just feel sorry for you for being in the business for so long.
So did you grow up in St. Louis?
I did. I was from North County and went to Rosary High School before you have to ask that. So I grew up in St. Louis and went away for a bit. Played collegiately in Miami at a school called Florida International University. Wanted to get out of the Midwest and get to experience a little bit of the international flavor that a place like Miami offers. And on that team, we had 14 countries represented, which was exactly what I was looking for, along with winning a national championship collegiately. So it was a good place for me. But yeah, grew up here and got away for a little bit, and then came back again in 1994 and started working in the club scene over in Illinois.
So how did your relationship with soccer start? Is it like a family thing, or like, just being around it all the time?
My dad was a six-a-side football player, American football player from a small town in southern Missouri. So when he came to me when I was 6 years old and said, "You want to play soccer?" He had no idea what it was, and he volunteered to coach. So, we did not certainly come from a soccer family. I guess my love affair with the game probably started watching a show called Soccer Made in Germany. It was a 1 hour show of the Bundesliga every Sunday morning at 10 a.m. And they would show of a game. They would show 30 minutes of the first half and 30 minutes of the second half, and I would never miss the show. So every weekend we would watch Soccer Made in Germany. And then that turned into going to St. Louis Stars games, which was an old NASL team. I remember vividly going to Fairgrounds Park in North City, watching the Stars play the St. Louis Billikens, the college team, on a like exhibition day, and it was just a real soccer environment, and that's where it started.
So your Bundesliga relationship started very
It
early.
did,
So it's
very
come full
early,
circle.
very early, yeah. And when I talked to some of the guys about the players that I remember from those broadcasts, they just laughed because of how old those players were, and these guys that I talked to today, they weren't born when I was watching those games. But names that they remember and names that they recognize as former national team players or stars from the Bundesliga.
What influenced you, getting into the professional game? Who were your biggest influences? Like, who really sort of kicked you up a level?
Oh boy, I would say when I was playing collegiately, I would start to do soccer camps with college coaches and college programs. And there was a guy at Indiana University named Jerry Yeagley, and there was a guy at Duke University named John Rennie, who I kind of looked up to when I was in that stage of moving from player to coach. And they kind of took me under the wing and let me help mentor me and help guide me through sort of my coaching days. And I would also sit with coaches that were working these camps and being involved with these two coaches. And we just kind of cut our teeth together and grew up learning about the game and developing our own personal philosophies of how we felt the game should be played and how it should be taught. So it was really just being around a couple of guys that created an environment for coaches to want to be around them. And then we kind of fed off each other to develop.
You spoke about kind of the transition between being a player and a coach. What were the key things that you learned as a player that helped you become the coach that you became?
Yeah, I would say, my experience down in Miami playing with the international players and just looking at their level of passion, a little bit about how they played the game differently than how we played in the States. Their levels of insight, maybe technical ability as well, I think were also important. And then there was a gentleman that I worked with, really fortunate to work with, was a guy named Will Korver and a guy named Franz von Balkum, both Dutch guys that were technical-based, skill-based coaches that help players develop technique and skills on the ball. And I got to spend a lot of time with both of them. I spent time with Will before he passed away, spent years with Franz before he passed away, and were really leaders for me with the importance of being comfortable with the soccer ball to help American players become more impactful in the game.
Your career post playing has spanned quite a number of different roles. Like sometimes you're coaching, sometimes you're head coach. Now you're an academy director. Is the role that you're in now, is that kind of peak for what you want? Is that how have you come to where you are now?
It's all awesome. I mean, to think that I've had a career being in youth soccer in the United States is just something that anybody I think would want. And I don't know how I really got to where I am. Um, I've spent my first team that I coached was when I was 17 years old. I was coaching a 14-year-old team with a good friend of mine, Scott Moser, who's here locally as well in St. Louis. And we coached together, a 14-year-old group. And that was my first experience coaching the game. I remember when I was playing it down at FIU at Florida International, I was coaching 4 teams while we were still playing. I knew I always wanted to coach. I knew that I didn't necessarily want to try to play professionally, although in those days there really wasn't a league to play in. For me, it was always about coaching, so being around the game as much as possible. So for me, moving from youth soccer and then coaching 3 years professionally, 1 year in the NASL, 2 in the USL, I thought that was the pinnacle. But now directing and helping organize the academy as it is now in an MLS academy environment, this is really something unique and special. And I feel like there's the natural progression from where I've been over the course of my career to where I am now. I think it's just a sort of a natural progression, and I love every minute of it. If I went back and started coaching tomorrow and gave up my academy position, I'd still be happy.
Just love the game.
Just love the game. Yeah, I love watching kids get better. I love them reaching their potential. I love seeing them reach heights that they didn't think they could reach. And whether it's me helping create an environment as I'm doing here, or it's me on the field with them trying to help them see the game a different way and help them get better that way, either way, it's fine for me.
So how did you get introduced to the club? Like, what was the first call? Where did the first call come from?
Yeah, I think at some point, I met Lutz, and we had the idea, or he shared the idea of what the club was looking to do and what the aspirations of the organization were. Never a word about, hey, Dale, how about becoming the academy director? It was just conversations. And at that point, I was at St. Louis Scott Gallagher. I was a technical director for Scott Gallagher. I was perfectly happy in the position that I was in. And I just kind of watched things evolve and watched how things were moving and with St. Louis City. And over time, I began to appreciate what it could mean for the community, more so than what it would mean for me, but what it would mean for St. Louis as a soccer organization. I've said it before that St. Louis has watched the game develop in this country from the sideline. We haven't been involved with the growth of the professional game in this country for 2.5 decades since the MLS came on board, since it started. And now, finally, with St. Louis City, having a professional team and a professional club, we're able to get off the sideline and participate in the development of the game at the professional level. As I thought more and more about that, and more and more about Lutz, and to be honest, his personality and his charisma and his ability to draw people in, I knew it was a place I wanted to be.
So you've accepted the job. What does an academy director do? What are you looking after? Because there's a lot of teams, there's a lot of layers to it. That feels like a very complex job to take on. Like, what does your day-to-day look like?
Yeah, I would say the job is the objective is to develop players to play professionally. We want players from the academy to make it into the stadium. That's the number one objective. How do you do that? You rely on your coaches to do a good job day to day with the players, and for them to be able to optimize their talents. As an academy director, you take everything away from the training field and away from the game, away from them. And you protect them from anything that could be a distraction from their work. So anything that has to do, whether it's team organization, parents, MLS, scheduling, MLS Next, travel, itinerary, whatever it could be that could distract them, you want to remove it from the equation so that all they have to worry about is cutting video, planning training, individual meetings with players, meetings with the teams, preparing players for games, doing player evaluations and player assessments, all the things that they need to do to help bring players from point A to point B. I try to take all the other things off their plate so that they can do the best job they can. And I want to keep things off of Lutz's plate because I don't want him getting any phone calls.
You did mention earlier that your phone goes off quite a lot. So in your role, like, how much impact do you have on the coaches, and how much influence do you have over the players? Because there are a number of, like, John Hackworth is a director of
Coaching.
coaching. So what's your role in this
Sure.
between the coaches and the players?
A big piece of my job is coaching development. So once a week, we try to go twice a week, but let's say regularly once a week, we get together for coaching development meetings. We look at video, we look at training sessions, we look at maybe some things that individual teams could be doing better, or we'll take certain principles and start to identify how we might train those particular principles to help the players, develop a little bit quicker or a little bit better. So doing coaching education once a week with the staff is an important part of this as well.
And the game of football, it feels like it's moving at 100 mile an hour, like especially over the last 5 years with like data, nutrition, and the technical skills that seem to be going up and up and up. How do you keep on top of where the game is going and refine like your way of thinking? Like,
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest thing right now, and Lutz has said this from the first week I was here, we don't want to train players to play for another club. We want to train players to play and represent St. Louis City. So really honing in on what the club's looking for in a player, and what style of play does the club want to play. Those are the things that I think are the most important for me right now is, refining those, understanding those, watching Coach Hackworth and Coach Bradley running training sessions, so that I can help share information with our staff so that they're moving in the same direction as the club is. That's probably the biggest piece from a development perspective for myself. That's probably the biggest piece that I'm focused on now. Maybe once we get into this and we feel like that we have a routine and we have a clear understanding as how it's best to teach youth to play the way that the first team wants to play, then maybe we'll start looking at my own personal development from outside of the club system and style of play. But right now it's all about how do we give our kids repetitions in the style of play that the club wants us to play.
what do you look for in a coach? Like, what are the core principles or fundamentals that you're like, this is a Dale Schilly type of coach?
Yeah. I mean, number one, first and foremost, they have to be a good teacher. So they have to get their kicks out of watching players get better. It can't be about, did we win 3-0? Did we win 4-1? It has to be about, players developing, seeing improvement over weeks and months, seeing really getting jazzed up about players making the first team, getting opportunities to play with City too. That's first and foremost. Second, collaboration. You have to be willing to stand up in front of the rest of the staff and present. You have to be willing to talk about your beliefs in the game. You have to be willing to hear what other people's beliefs are, and then say, okay, maybe I can make some adjustments and change the way I'm thinking, because I may have just found a better way. Lastly, you got to be willing to work. Don't count how many hours you're working and look at your salary and then say, well, I'm working too hard, because you'll always come up a loser. And in this game, it's a cause. It's in this situation where we're trying to develop players and bring them from 14 years old to make them pros when they're maybe 18, 19, 20 years old. That's a cause. It's not a job. So you're completely invested in it, and don't try to look at it as a 9 to 5, because it's not what it is.
You mentioned Bradley and John, and that you watch how they train. Do you take their ideas and try and put them through the younger teams? Do you make sure that everybody is kind of closely aligned around like a singular philosophy of?
For sure. One of the biggest tasks that we just had over the last few months is the development of our game principles. And that's really the core of how you're trying to teach, how you're trying to get a team to look like you want them to look. We call it a game model. And so by the development of those principles, we are all on the same page. We're all moving in the same direction. And so having our staff buy into those principles, understand how to teach those principles, is a critical part of this. And then from Lutz's perspective and Coach Bradley's perspective, are all the teams bought in and using those principles to develop players? If we are, then players are getting all the repetitions they need in the way that we're trying to play, so that we can literally move players through the age groups, and when they get called into the next team, that they, a coach doesn't have to reteach or or present something to a player that might be a new idea. It's something that they've already heard and already practiced.
When you are looking at talent that's coming into the system, what are the things that you're looking
Mhm.
for with a like a modern player that comes into the academy as potentially as young as U14?
Yeah. It's one of the biggest changes I've had to make. When I used to assess players, younger players, one of the first things I would look at is their technical ability, their skill level, their vision, their awareness. But we have to, in the way we're trying to play, we have to look at how they play in transition. How do they defend against the ball? How quickly do they look to close the ball down and impact the game from a defending side as well? So we've added that piece of it to the overall assessment of a player. Sure, we're still looking at, can they receive a ball, pass a ball, have some level of creativity and contribution on the attacking side. But the way we want to play, there's an aggressive, assertive side of, from a defending perspective that we want these players to have.
Do you think as tactical systems get more complex that you're asking more of players from an intelligence perspective now? Like, is that something, the ability to retain instruction and execute plans, is that something that
Yeah, for
you
sure.
look at?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, players have to have a level of awareness and understanding of what's going on around them, a lot more than what it used to be. And maybe it's just the fact that we're at a professional academy level and the expectations are much higher than what they were when I was in a club system. But the ability for a player to think their way through, to be able to retain information, to be able to adapt into a system is very much an important part of the of identifying a player for the program.
One of the noticeable things working, with Lutz is he puts a lot of onus on character. And he says that when he signs players for the first team, like he's doing all the research, he's calling up to find out what they're like off the pitch. When you're bringing in players to the academy, it's more difficult to assess character, but it must still be important. How do you get a quick take on who you're bringing in and whether they've got a good attitude or whether they're going to be able to do the things that you need them to do to succeed?
Well, a year ago when we did our team formation, we did a handful of tryouts, 5 tryouts. So we didn't get to know the players a lot. This year, with the under 14 age group, we have a year, 8-month programming to get to know the players before we select a team for the under 15 age group. So you can do some minimal research in terms of how do they interact with you, how do they interact with players around them, that sort of thing. I would say the biggest piece is that we are the filtering system for Lutz. We are the system that helps identify who has the character traits that when they're 18, 19, 20 years old, that they could get moved on into a first team. So there's, really watching how players behave on the road. How do they interact with each other in the locker room? Do they participate in some of our community activities, whether it's working with Spencer or working with kids in our community soccer programs? How do they interact and lead in those environments? Those are important opportunities for our players to show their growth, show their leadership, and show just their character levels that we want to have as a part of the program going forward.
Lutz has spoken about the idea that you're not just building elite players, you're building elite humans. If they go on to do other things, that they come out of this taking, lessons in leadership. What do you do to build the character of players? Because this doesn't sound like the sort of the normal thing that goes on in sport. Like how are you developing the men?
First, I would say that's really the reason why I got into coaching, is to be a part of that part of players' lives. There's something about coaching and teaching and bringing players along from a soccer perspective, but I think there's more about teaching and bringing players along from a personal perspective. So getting involved in community activities, getting involved with different, like the Spence activity, special needs soccer programming, getting involved with coaching younger players and just being in leadership roles. One of the things that we have in the club is we have leaders for the individual teams for their individual locker rooms. And so what we've asked players is over a certain period of time is to take a role in leading the locker room, physically leading the locker room, making sure that it's clean. It's an important part
Hmm.
of a club is the locker room, and that's a sacred place for a team. But how do you lead the players in the locker room? Are you able to keep them focused on the right thing? Or if there's issues between players, can we help players learn how to deal with certain situations that way? We're dealing with 15-year-olds, 14-year-olds, 16-year-olds. Not everything is milk and toast when we deal with players on the road. There's always situations. So whenever we deal with a situation with the player, we hit it head on. We ask them to be a man about owning up to certain situations, to be upfront with communication and keeping staff aware of potential problems or some things that we need to know about before they surprise us. And all those moments are just character development opportunities. And they're things that players would go through in our environment or outside of our environment. And the fact that they get to go through them in our environment allows us a chance to help develop their character.
When we spoke to Bradley on this podcast a few months ago, culture is a big thing for him. He's creating a culture for like one team. You've got lots of teams. Do you create, is there like an overarching culture, or do you allow like the freedom to create different cultures in different teams? Like how does that sort of thing work so that you're getting the right sort of behaviors coming back at you?
Yeah, culture's huge, and you know that. Coach Bradley understands the value of the locker room and players pulling in the same direction. The way I've tackled that is to try to develop as strong of a culture as I can within our staff, and then from there allow the coaches to develop that culture within their teams and within the locker room. It would be next to impossible for me to manage four cultures and try to pull them all in the same direction. A lot of this is about coach development. Obviously, players want to move on and have future opportunities. Our staff wants the same. Our staff don't want to always coach in a certain age group. They want to be able to move up the ladder as well and experience the game maybe at a professional level. So to give them the autonomy to lead their players is an important part of their development. I try to set a good example within our coaching staff, and hopefully they take that and bring it down into their teams.
Only a small fraction of players make it to the very highest level. And obviously, for you, getting those players to the highest level is going to be a big determinator of success for you. But this club doesn't only, that's not the only factor that this club and your academy is thinking about in terms of success. What else looks like success for you as the leader of this group?
Yeah, I would say two pieces. Obviously, well, there's three pieces. One, you mentioned getting into the first team and playing in a stadium would be first and foremost. Second, my whole life I've been in organizations where the pinnacle was playing college soccer. So having players that can play in college, that we get them pushed on into collegiate programs that are the appropriate levels so that they have a high quality experience is an important part as well. And they come out of there with an education. The third piece would be how many of our guys come back into the sport and contribute to the development of the game in this country. It's really important that we are creating an experience for our players that help develop their passion for the game. And if we can create such a level of passion that they come back to coach, they come back to direct, they come back and be a club owner. Who knows? I mean, that can happen. And we're the greatest influencers on the development of that passion. So that would be the third piece, is that's going to be a little bit further down the line. But if we can help them have that experience, that they come back and contribute again to the game, I think we've been highly successful.
And what would you say to the young players of St. Louis that want to get noticed, that want to get on your radar? Like, what are the most important things that they could be doing for themselves to hit the level that's needed?
I mean, continue to play. I mean, you can't get to the level without playing and being in a high quality environment. So finding an environment that you're successful, whether it's the best team around or it's not, just being in an environment where you feel like you're receiving quality coaching, you're training as often as you can train, you're getting into games. As a staff, we'll find you. We found players from all different levels a year ago for under 15s and under 16s, which were their inaugural seasons. We'll find them. We found them for the under 14 pathway program. We'll find them in years to come from wherever they are. Good players will always be found. The town of St. Louis, city of St. Louis, is small enough from a soccer perspective that if there's a good player out there somewhere, it always ends up on my desk. Somebody will make a phone call. Somebody will send an email saying, "You can't believe what I saw today." So just be out there.
And the same question for coaches. I think when you're an outsider in the game, you always think there's no way it could ever be me. If you're a young coach in the game, like what should they be doing to elevate their career and get on your desk as well? I guess.
Yeah, I mean, I would say to think that it could never be me, I would challenge that. I was a guy that didn't make his high school team, so I came from zero in terms of experiences growing up with. I don't want to say experience with growing up with the game because I played CYC and that sort of thing, but it's there. If you have the passion to get there and you have an idea of how you want to make it, it can certainly happen. So jump in, start coaching, coach a team, get involved and maybe coach multiple teams, get involved with the ODP, get involved with doing extra sessions, come out and watch people train, come out and watch a city academy session. We have no issues with people coming out and watching what we're doing in training and seeing what the level looks like. It's important. And then, coach all sorts of levels. I talked to you earlier. I said that when I was playing at FIU, I had 4 teams that I was coaching. One was an under 19 team that was an unbelievable team. Players that ended up in college across the country. Some of them represented us on the international stage. Under 19, a great team. The Key Biscayne Gunners. Then I had an under 16 team called the Kayland Kicks. Good team as well. Was a Kiwanis club team, but we took them out of the recreational arena and got them into State Cup. Very good team as well. An under 12 team called 5 Star. It was a Cuban club in Miami, and it was a purely recreational team. And then I had an under 6 team that was purely recreational as well, 6 aside. Matter of fact, Garo Upremium's and Bob Greasy's son played on that team. So 2 famous Miami Dolphins. Don't mean to. I don't think that you would know those two.
Has no idea what you're talking about.
Garo Upremium was a place kicker. Bob Greasy was a quarterback for the Dolphins. Their kids played for me. So I coached at all levels and benefited from each one of them. Coaching 5-year-olds is much different than coaching 19-year-olds. But coaching at those levels at each one of them helped my development, and I just kept putting myself out there.
People can come and watch all of the games.
All the games, yeah.
All the games. Just tune into the app. We'll put the schedule out.
Yeah, put the schedule out. Or they can go to MLSnext.com and the schedule's out there for the entire league. So I think there's a place for you to search for St. Louis City. You can find it that way or find it out or find the schedule on the app.
Great. Few more questions to go. What does success look like for you personally this year?
I think, continuing to move players up the ladder, getting Coach Hackworth and Coach Bradley to continue to look at players that need to get moved into that program or into those programs. And just from a training perspective, that they say, look, these are kids that we want to pull in. Continue to open the doors for our players for other opportunities. Hopefully national team opportunities. We've opened that door here over the last year. We have, I don't know, say 5 or 6 boys that have had opportunities now at the national team level, and that's something that wasn't happening a couple of years ago for them. So continuing to do that is huge, and just watching our players' development and continuing to compete with the top clubs in the country. We talked about wanting players to move from where we are and into the stadium. But success also looks like, how do we compete against the Seattle Sounders? How do we compete against FC Dallas? How do we compete against LAFC? How do we compete against the bigger markets, Miami, Dallas, Los Angeles, New York? I mean, those are huge markets compared to St. Louis. If we can compete with those, I think we're doing something right.
Are you thinking a little bit about the 2026 World Cup and whether someone from this academy could potentially be in the team?
That's always something. I think there's a couple. We have to see what happens to them physically, but there's probably 3 or 4 boys here that I think could, if things go the right way, they could get an appearance.
How about that, City Voice podcast listeners? How about that? So just the final couple of questions. Our kit launched the other day. I wanted to get your take on like what you think of the shirt. The big reveal happened.
Love it. I mean, I was in the stadium the other night, saw people walking around. That was the day of the launch, if I'm not mistaken. I love the color. I love the sort of Belgium Spanish look to it as well. The color scheme, and I just think it's an awesome jersey.
Awesome. And what did you think of the game? I saw you at the very top in the media room, looking down on the pitch, doing your scouting work. Tell us what you thought of the stadium opener.
It was awesome. Just to have Bayer Leverkusen here was just an incredible experience for the players, number one, but for the city of St. Louis to be able to see a Bundesliga team in the stadium, on the pitch as their first match to watch and come experience. It was incredible. And just watching people walk, listening to the Luligans sing. I mean, I've known the Luligans since 2011 when I was with AC St. Louis, and just knowing where that started from and where the supporters groups in general started here in St. Louis and how they've grown and what they've done for the soccer community is been amazing. So just to see everybody there in the celebratory way, it was a great night.
And I think most fans noticed in the second half a few very young players came on and did pretty well.
I wasn't too proud. It was great. I mean, I think seeing Miggy, Fritz, Caden, it was just Dita. It was just awesome to see the guys get out there with the likes of guys that have represented Germany. To be out there with Diaby, who nearly and still could get into the French team. It's a great experience for those kids.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much, Dale, for coming on the show. This has been a long time coming, but I'm sure the people listening are going to absolutely love it. Will you come back again?
I'll be here with no problem.
Awesome. And if you are listening to this on your podcast service, Spotify or iTunes or whatever they call it these days, leave a 5-star review. Say that you love listening to Dale because that will certainly encourage him to come on. Thank you for listening. On that note, I'll say ciao for now. Thanks for coming in.
Thank you.